as with any tradition, religious tradition that emerges from a specific set of people that can be pointed to as historic people who were in a context and created a religious tradition, as you can see from Christianity, it Christianity is inherently bound up in the context of the people who helped and basically found it and create it, and who experienced the first set of religious visions and experiences they simply could not explain, which they then ascribed to the divine. And as a result of that, Christianity is really bound up in the experience that people had around the person known as Jesus. Now, his official name would probably be something like Yeshua Bar Joshua, or something like that. Jesus, son of Joseph. And the idea of sort of adding or ascribing the appellation of Christ to his name is a theological construct. It's sort of like it's a title that comes along when the Christian church starts seeing Jesus as this Christos figure, which is a Greek term which is similar to the Hebrew term of Mashiach, or Messiah. And the Messiah tradition is a very long-standing one, and it's sort of deeply buried in Hebrew history, where the Messiah was simply the anointed one, the one anointed by God to save the people. And initially, this was a political designation, where it was, for example, initially in the book of Isaiah, the first Messiah that they can really point to is actually the person who sort of leads the Persian Empire, known as Cyrus, who actually broke the power of the Babylonian Empire, and by sort of breaking that power, was able to sort of break the hold that the empire had over the Hebrew Jewish people, and was able to allow them to return back to their homeland. So the idea of being able to return to one's homeland was, that was what they had been seeking since they had been effectively kind of kidnapped from their place by the empire, who had a tendency of moving people around the empire as a way of keeping them confused and incapable of rising up against the empire. It also served the empire's needs, where if they needed workers over here to let's say they need more workers to build a city over here, if they needed more workers over here to help work in the wheat fields or whatever of the empire, then people were just simply picked up and moved, because it served the empire's purposes and not the purpose of the people their own. So Cyrus, by allowing them to return, which is sort of the subject of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Jewish Bible, by allowing them to return, he is sort of at some level the anointed one of God. He is enacting the will of the divine. So it starts off as this political idea, but then over time it enters this sort of more spiritualized place, and when it intersects and interacts with the Roman Empire, and before the Roman Empire, the Hellenistic Empire, the Empire of Alexander the Great, which then sort of breaks down into different factions and sort of people running different parts of the land that Alexander the Great had actually conquered. And so initially you have this sort of challenge of this idea that initially sort of was political, but then as the people are conquered by more and more and more and more empires, The idea of it being a political thing sort of takes on this other entity of it being a spiritualized thing, where it's not just a political leader who God, grants the ability to give the people, what they want, but they're seeing that the political framework, the structure of the society itself is broken and necessitates an entire reevaluation of the society, which at that cosmic big level, that's going to be the work of God. So you have this idea of the Messiah becoming literally almost like a divine figure, this sort of this hand of God, which breaks into the current moment and sort of breaks the power of the empire in a meaningful, powerful way, and reevaluates and reimagines every relationship and every sort of structure of power that existed. So when Jesus comes along and starts, preaching about an alternative way of being, one that is entirely distant from the Roman Empire way of being, and starts sort of developing this framework of reimagining what it means to even be human. Where you have this emphasis on forgiveness and an emphasis on equality of all people, an emphasis on the divine granting humans sort of this idea of this utopian world of harmony within the will of God. People start seeing that being an alternative political entity. So it's political, but it's not literally like an army rising up to, get rid of the Roman Empire. It's sort of saying that at some level you may conquer my body, but you will not conquer my soul. I am existing at a different level and a plane of existence than where the Roman Empire wants me to be. So it allows you to sort of reimagine yourself not as conquered totally, but simply as subjugated politically by an entity, whereas your body, your soul, your being, your essence is actually free and equal and loved by this divine being, which establishes an alternative way of viewing the world to the empire. And the empire doesn't like that, obviously, because the empire wants us to say, we are so dominant, there is nothing you can have against us. Accept it, become a part of us, assimilate into us, and we will allow you to live. So what Jesus does as Messiah is takes this political framework and then sort of adds this spiritual element to it and makes it a cosmic thing, where at this cosmic level, Jesus won't be this level up here. Jesus is sort of breaking the power of the empire, not obviously on the ground in a political, practical day-to-day level, but by breaking it up here, it can start creating new ways of being, new ways of thinking, which will then trickle down into the practicalities, the actual lived reality of the world. So when we think about Christianity, we have to think about this new framework and response to empire and to power that Jesus sort of brings about, because the being, the person of the human person of Jesus and the experiences of the human person around Jesus, this is the foundation of what Christianity is at its very core. So when we think about who these people are, they are at core colonized people. They are people who are dominated politically by the Roman Empire. The people that Jesus is coming from, that's drawing most of his followers from, is a region known as Galilee, which is the most sort of subjugated and the most oppressed part of Palestine, which was already in a subjugated and oppressed place. So Galilee was not only sort of oppressed because it was a part of Palestine, which is oppressed by the Roman Empire, but Galilee was seen as lesser within Palestine itself. So it's sort of like the lowest of the lowest of the low. So Jesus is sort of coming from the absolute very bottom. So in a sense, this incarnation of Jesus, this humanness of the divine person that Jesus is, sort of places the divine at the very experienced, reality of the absolute most subjugated people possible in that place and time. And that's essential to remember, because we can't reject that Christianity is, again, at its core, an experienced religion inherent in the flesh of actual people. And the flesh of this sort of colonized, dominated people who are reimagining who they can be in light of this overwhelming imperial presence. And what they're doing is they're sort of creating this, as I said, this alternative reality, this reign of God versus reign of empire. This sort of Pax Christi, peace of Christ, versus the Pax Romana, which was the entire structural, oppressive subjugation system that was known as peace. But it actually was just sort of, it was only peace because nobody had the power to fight back. So it was peaceful because nobody had the ability to fight. It's not really inherently peaceful. The Pax Romana was built upon oppression. And at some level, this sort of this idea of oppressiveness at core of Christianity, where we're emerging from this Christian people, goes away when Christianity becomes the religion of the empire itself. So you wind up having this empire sort of having to wrestle with a religion that is at core not imperial friendly. And you wind up with the kinds of weirdness and craziness that we see over time, where you can see people saying, Jesus is inherently white. Jesus is going to be inherently, sort of carrying water for the empire. Jesus is sort of this racialized being that makes the powerful feel good in sort of overwhelming and subjugating the oppressed, which is exactly opposite of who Jesus really was, which then allows this inbreaking of this this different framework where you have images of like Jesus as black, Jesus as female, Jesus as a native person, which sort of breaks this idea. So if Jesus is incarnational, Jesus is literally like the bodies of actual people, then Jesus could easily be then black, because humans are black, humans are native, humans are women. Jesus becomes a representation of humanness as the divine creation. Another really key element that we really need to pull into this is this idea of the prophetic, which we've kind of touched on before, but basically is this idea of the prophet in Hebrew tradition is what makes one a prophet is that they speak the words of God to the people. Now, the prophet was always seen as speaking the words of God to the powerful to speak up for the oppressed. The prophetic within the Hebrew tradition and then into the Christian tradition inherently is speaking against the oppressive and oppression and subjugation of people inherently. So when Jesus takes on the vision of the prophetic, he's saying, I am the ultimate prophet. The Messiah is the ultimate prophet, speaking for the oppressed, speaking for the subjugated. And it links the messianic tradition with the prophetic tradition, and this linkage, so that you see, for example, so much of Christian language around Jesus comes from, this Christian language of Jesus, when they're referencing the Jewish Bible, they're referencing mainly Isaiah, they're referencing Micah, they're referencing Amos, they're referencing the prophetic and how the prophetic speaks of this, this way of being that is the Messiah speaking for the people against the powerful. Okay? So, at some level, anyone who's sort of engaging in that prophetic is engaging in the work of Jesus and is then engaging in the work of this radical reconciliation that the book is talking about. That reconciliation is inherently a radical act because it is trying to speak for those who are subjugated and trying to achieve that sense of justice. You know how I said in the last video, you have to have peace, justice, mercy, truth. You must have that justice part. You must have that truth part for reconciliation to exist. So, reconciliation inherently, and as we see next week, when we look at the Ubuntu tradition and Desmond Tutu as a prophet, we see that this sort of reconciliation necessitates this prophetic move, which is referencing who Jesus was, referencing God breaking into the human world in a way that is even more powerful than the prophets, becomes the ultimate prophet. So at some level, when you're doing reconciliation work, you are doing prophetic work, which is really the main point that the book really wants to put out, is that reconciliation is at core prophetic. It's about transforming the world from the Pax Romana, Pax Americana, possibly, Pax Britannia, when Britain, was a British Empire, into the Pax Christi, because the Pax Americana is not the Pax Christi. The Pax Britannia, the Pax Capitalism, is not the Pax Christi or the divine peace. It is entirely different. It is something separate.